I never thought the hardest negotiation of my life would be for the right to hold my own grandson. When my daughter-in-law slid a laminated list of absurd visitation rules across her granite countertop, she expected me to grovel. Instead, I handed my son an envelope that dismantled her entire world. My husband, Michael, and I built our lives from the ground up. We didn't come from old money, trust funds, or family connections. Michael started out fixing lawnmowers in his father's garage in the Chicago suburbs. And by the time we were in our 50s, we owned a regional chain of hardware and home supply stores. We lived comfortably, but we never flaunted it. We still drove 10-year-old sedans, clipped coupons out of habit, and valued hard work above all else. When Michael passed away from a sudden, massive widowmaker heart attack 7 years ago, my entire world shattered. The only thing that kept me breathing, the only anchor tying me to this earth was our son, David. David was 26 at the time, bright-eyed, ambitious, and possessing his father's gentle soul. Perhaps he was a little too gentle. Looking back, I realized that in my grief, I overcompensated. I wanted to protect David from the harshness of the world that had so cruelly taken his father. When we sold the company for a substantial sum shortly after Michael's death, I ensured David was set up for life. I wanted him to pursue his passion for architecture without the suffocating pressure of financial survival. I wanted him to be happy. Then, he met Chloe. Chloe Montgomery was beautiful. I'll give her that. She had the kind of polished, curated look that took hours and thousands of dollars to achieve the perfectly tousled blonde hair, the designer clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouting it, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in PR, or at least, she carried the title. Her real full-time job seemed to be curating an aesthetic on social media. From the very beginning, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. It wasn't just the way she looked right past me when we first met, her eyes scanning my modest living room as if calculating its square footage and resale value. It was the way she treated David. She didn't love him. She managed him. She wore him like an expensive accessory. "Martha," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension disguised as sweetness. "David tells me you still clean your own gutters. You know, people of your age really shouldn't be on ladders. We could hire someone with a fraction of your portfolio." I brushed off the passive-aggressive remarks. I told myself I was just being a protective, widowed mother. I smiled through the engagement. Even when Chloe demanded a $150,000 wedding in Napa Valley, I wrote the checks because David looked so desperately in love, and I couldn't bear to see the light in his eyes dim. After the wedding, they needed a place to live. David's architecture firm was just getting off the ground, and Chloe had quit her PR job because it was stifling her creative energy. Against the quiet advice of my attorney, Marcus, I purchased a stunning $1.4 million four-bedroom house in Oak Brook. However, I wasn't entirely foolish. I had spent 40 years in business with Michael. I bought the house under an LLC that I solely controlled. I let David and Chloe live there rent-free, covering the property taxes and major maintenance myself. To Chloe, it was her house. She decorated it in stark, cold whites and greys, threw lavish dinner parties, and played the role of the self-made suburban socialite perfectly. She never once mentioned to her friends that the roof over her head belonged to her mother-in-law. For 3 years, I kept my distance, playing the role of the polite, check-writing mother. I endured the awkward holiday dinners where Chloe would critique my cooking, and I watched as David grew quieter. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his wife's endless demands. Then came the news that changed everything. Chloe was pregnant. I was overjoyed. The thought of a new life, a little boy who might share Michael's crooked smile or David's gentle laugh, breathed new life into my aging bones. I knitted blankets. I bought vintage children's books, and I offered my help in any way they needed. But the pregnancy only amplified Chloe's need for control. She declared a stress-free zone, which essentially meant I was banned from the house. "Your energy is very anxious, Martha," she told me over the phone one afternoon, munching on organic celery. "My doula says the baby can feel it." We're going to need some space. Space turned into months of isolation. I was excluded from the baby shower, a catered affair that looked more like a red carpet event than a celebration of life because my name wasn't on the curated guest list. David would call me occasionally, whispering from his car, apologizing profusely but insisting that Chloe's hormones were just making her sensitive. When my grandson, Leo, was finally born, I wasn't allowed at the hospital. I sat in my living room, staring at a picture of Michael, tears streaming down my face as I waited for a text message. It came 2 days later. Not a photo, not a phone call, just a sterile 2-line text from Chloe. Leo is here, 8 pounds 2 ounces. We are not accepting visitors for the 4th trimester to protect his immune system and my bonding experience. 3 months. I was expected to wait 3 months to meet my first and only grandchild. I swallowed my pride. I respected her boundaries. I dropped off meals on their porch like a delivery driver, catching glimpses of my son through the front window, looking exhausted and hollow. I waited. I bided my time. But I was about to learn that the isolation was only the warm-up act. Exactly 94 days after Leo was born, my phone chimed. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in my garden, pruning the rose bushes Michael had planted 2 decades ago. You may come by at 2 p.m. tomorrow for a brief introduction to Leo. Do not ring the doorbell. Text when you are in the driveway. Do not wear perfume. Do not bring unsolicited gifts. It felt more like a summons to a parole hearing than an invitation to see my grandson. But I didn't care. I was finally going to meet him. I spent the entire next morning scrubbing myself with unscented soap, putting on freshly laundered, neutral-coloured clothes, and practicing my most pleasant, non-threatening smile in the mirror. I pulled into the sweeping driveway of the Oak Brook house at exactly 1:55 p.m. I put my car in park, took a deep, steadying breath, and sent the required text message. I'm here. So excited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, the heavy oak front door opened, and David stepped out. My heart ached at the sight of him. My handsome, vibrant boy looked like a ghost. He had dark circles under his eyes, his clothes were rumpled, and he possessed the nervous, flinching energy of a beaten dog. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, quickly closing the door behind him. He gave me a stiff, one-armed hug. "Listen, before you go in, Chloe has a few things she wants to go over. Just agree to them, okay? Please, Mom. For me. She's been really stressed." "Of course, David," I said gently, patting his cheek. "I just want to see the baby." He led me inside. The house was freezing, the air conditioning cranked up, and it smelled strongly of medical-grade disinfectant. Chloe was sitting at the massive kitchen island, wearing silk loungewear, sipping from a glass of sparkling water. A baby monitor sat next to her, silent. Leo wasn't even in the room. "Martha," she said, not standing up. She gestured to a bar stool across from her. "Have a seat." I sat. I looked around, desperate for a glimpse of a bassinet, a stray pacifier. Anything. "Where is he?" "He's napping," Chloe said flatly. "And before we wake him, we need to establish the paradigm of our relationship going forward." "David," the folder. David looked at his shoes, his face flushed with shame, and handed me a pristine white manila folder. I opened it. Inside were 3 pages of heavy cardstock, printed with an elegant, monogrammed header. "The Montgomery Higgins Household. Rules of Engagement." I stared at the paper, the words blurring for a second. "What is this, Chloe?" "It's a legally binding outline of our boundaries," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. "If you want to be a part of Leo's life, you will adhere to it. Read it." I looked down and began to read. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It wasn't just a list of polite requests. It was a manifesto of control, designed to humiliate and extort me. Asterisk. Rule 1. Visitation window. Visitations will be granted on a bi-weekly basis, for a maximum of 30 minutes. Requests must be submitted via email 14 days in advance. Asterisk. Rule 2. Physical contact. No kissing the child. No holding the child, unless expressly offered by the mother. Hand washing must be observed by the mother for a minimum of 2 minutes using provided surgical scrub. Asterisk Rule 3. Financial contribution. To compensate for the emotional labor of hosting and to secure Leo's future, a mandatory $5,000 contribution to Leo's private education trust is required upon every authorized visit. Proof of transfer must be emailed 24 hours prior. Asterisk. Rule 4. Gifts and offerings. All gifts must be pre-approved from a specific registry. Handmade, vintage, or low-tier store-bought items will be immediately discarded at the door. Asterisk. Rule 5. Grandparent title. The child will not refer to you as grandma or nana, as those terms age the family dynamic. You will be referred to as Martha. Asterisk. Rule 6. Estate transparency. To ensure Leo is adequately protected, a full, unredacted copy of Martha Higgins's last will and testament, as well as an inventory of all liquid and non-liquid assets, must be provided to Chloe Higgins's attorney within 30 days. I stopped reading. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. I felt a strange sensation washing over me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't the crippling grief I had felt since Michael died. It was absolute, crystalline rage. I looked up at my son. "David," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Did you read this?" David wouldn't look at me. He stared intently at the marble countertop. "Mom, it's just how we want to raise him." Chloe read a lot of books on generational trauma and toxic family dynamics. The money part is just, well, you have plenty. And it's for Leo's future. It's just a boundary. Generational trauma? I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I had paid off his student loans. I had funded his business. I had bought the roof over their heads. "Yes, Martha," Chloe interjected, her eyes flashing with triumphant cruelty. "You have a very domineering presence. It's overwhelming for a new mother. These rules are non-negotiable. If you cannot sign the back page acknowledging your compliance, then I think it's best you leave. We don't need your toxicity around my son." She smiled then. It was a small, sharp smile. She thought she had won. She thought I was a sad, desperate old widow who would trade her dignity, her fortune, and her self-respect just for a 30-minute glimpse of her grandson. She thought I was weak. She forgot that I was Michael Higgins's widow. She forgot that I helped build a ruthless, cutthroat business in a male-dominated industry in the 1980s. I slowly closed the folder. I placed my hands flat on the cool granite countertop. "I see," I said, my voice completely steady. "Well, this is certainly a comprehensive list." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stood up, smoothing the front of my slacks. "Mom?" David asked, finally looking up, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He had expected me to cry. He had expected the usual guilt trip. My absolute calm terrified him. "I won't be needing to see Leo today," I said politely, picking up my purse. "I wouldn't want to violate the paradigm of your household. Martha, if you walk out that door without signing," Chloe warned, her voice rising in pitch, "you will never see this child. Do you understand me?" "Never." "I understand perfectly, Chloe," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll be in touch." I walked out of the house, climbed into my car, and drove away. I didn't go home to cry. I drove straight to the downtown offices of my attorney, Marcus. I sat in his leather chair, drank a cup of black coffee, and spent the next 3 hours methodically dismantling the financial safety net my son and his wife had been resting on. When I finally drove back to their house 3 days later, I didn't bring a check for a trust fund, and I didn't bring an apology. I brought an envelope And inside that envelope was the eviction notice. Marcus Sterling had been Michael's attorney and his closest friend since 1988. He was a man who spoke in measured tones, wore tailored tweed even in July, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. When I walked into his mahogany-paneled office and dropped the laminated rules of engagement onto his desk, he didn't say a word. He simply put on his reading glasses, scanned the document, and let out a long, heavy sigh. "I warned you about her, Martha," Marcus murmured, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. 3 years ago, when you bought that property, I told you she had the eyes of a grifter." "You were right, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I gripped the armrests of my leather chair. "I let my grief and my love for David blind me. I thought if I just provided enough, she would soften, but she doesn't want to be part of this family. She wants to own it." "So, what is the instruction?" Marcus asked, picking up a gold Mont Blanc pen. "Burn it down," I said. "All of it. Legally, methodically, and absolutely." We spent the afternoon untangling the web of financial support I had quietly woven beneath my son's life. The Oakbrook house was the easiest part. Because I had insisted on purchasing it through Oak and Iron Holdings LLC, a holding company of which I was the sole managing member, David and Chloe were legally nothing more than month-to-month tenants living there, rent-free. Then came David's architecture firm. He was a talented designer, but a terrible businessman. 2 years ago, when the firm was on the verge of bankruptcy, I had authorized a $250,000 bridge loan from my estate to keep his doors open. We had drawn up a formal promissory note, mostly for tax purposes, but it included a standard demand clause. The lender could call the loan due in full at any time, with 30 days' notice. Finally, there was the Platinum American Express card. I had given David a card tied to my primary account for emergencies when he was in college. Over the years, that card had slowly become the primary funding source for Chloe's lifestyle groceries at high-end organic markets, designer baby clothes, and lavish spa days. "Are you certain about this, Martha?" Marcus asked gently, as his paralegal printed the documents. "Once you ring this bell, you cannot unring it. It will break David." "He is already broken, Marcus," I replied, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline. "Chloe has him in a chokehold, and she's using my money to tighten the grip. If I don't pull the rug out now, he'll never learn to stand on his own 2 feet, and I will never see my grandson." 3 days later, I pulled into the sweeping driveway of the Oakbrook house. It was 10 a.m. on a Friday. I didn't park on the street. I didn't send a subservient text message from my car. I marched right up the bluestone walkway and pressed my thumb firmly against the Ring doorbell. I held it there for a solid 5 seconds. Less than a minute later, the door flew open. Chloe stood there in a matching cashmere lounge set, her face flushed with absolute fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but venomous. "You didn't submit an email request. You woke Leo. And you're ringing the bell? Did you completely ignore the boundaries we established?" "Hello, Chloe," I said smoothly, stepping past her into the foyer before she could block the entrance. "Martha, get out," she demanded, pivoting to face me. David, your mother is trespassing." David hurried out of his home office, looking even more ragged than he had on Tuesday. He froze when he saw me standing in the foyer, my posture perfectly straight, holding a thick manila envelope. "Mom?" he stammered. What are you doing here? You didn't sign the agreement. You can't be here." "I brought my own paperwork, David," I said, extending the envelope toward him. He took it tentatively, as if it were a live grenade. Chloe crossed her arms, a smug, self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She assumed I had caved. She assumed the envelope contained the $5,000 extortion check for her trust fund and a signed copy of her ridiculous rules. "Let me see the check," Chloe demanded, stepping forward to snatch the envelope from David's hands. David opened the clasp and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. There was no check. There was no signed agreement. His eyes darted across the bold, capitalized letters at the top of the first page. 30-day notice to quit and vacate premises. All the blood drained from David's face. "Mum, what is this?" "It's an eviction notice, David," I said clearly. "Oak and Iron Holdings, LLC, is terminating your tenancy. You have 30 days to vacate the property, remove all personal belongings, and turn over the keys." "Eviction?" Chloe laughed, though the sound was brittle and high-pitched. "You can't evict us from our own house. You bought this for us." "I bought this for an LLC that I control, Chloe," I corrected her, turning my gaze to meet hers. "You are guests here. Guests who have overstayed their welcome and insulted their host." David flipped to the second document, his hands visibly shaking now. "Demand for payment in full. Promissory note." "Mum, the business loan?" David choked out, his voice cracking. "You're calling in the $250,000? I don't have that kind of liquidity. If I pull that from the firm's accounts, I'll have to lay off my entire staff. We'll be bankrupt by Tuesday." "Then I suggest you start liquidating assets, David," I replied coldly, though my heart was breaking at the sight of his despair. "You are a grown man. It is time you finance your own life." "You vindictive old witch!" Chloe screamed, the carefully curated mask of the mindful suburban mother slipping completely. Her face twisted into an ugly, unrecognizable snarl. "You're doing this because I wouldn't let you infect my child with your toxic boomer energy. You think you can buy us? You think money gives you the right to control my son?" "Your son?" I echoed, stepping closer to her. I didn't raise my voice, but the absolute ice in my tone made her take a step back. "You demanded $5,000 just for me to look at my grandson. You wanted my last will and testament handed over to your lawyers. You don't care about boundaries, Chloe. You care about leverage. And unfortunately for you, you just found out who actually holds it." I turned back to David, who looked like he was about to physically collapse against the wall. "I love you, David," I said softly, "but I will not be extorted. And I will not fund the prison you are living in. You have 30 days. I suggest you start packing." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door. As I walked down the bluestone path, I heard the undeniable sound of Chloe screaming at David, blaming him for not controlling me, followed by the shattering of glass against the inside of the oak door. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and finally let the tears fall. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in watching a fabricated life disintegrate. I had immediately cut off the Platinum American Express card. According to the statements I reviewed with Marcus, Chloe had been putting an average of $12,000 a month on it. Without my silent, invisible influx of cash, the Montgomery Higgins household hit a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. Chloe, predictably, took to social media. She posted a cryptic, tearful video on her Instagram stories about financial abuse and cutting out toxic narcissists to protect her family's peace. Her echo chamber of superficial friends rushed to validate her, praising her bravery. What she didn't post on Instagram was that the landscapers stopped coming. The organic grocery deliveries ceased, and her weekly in-home massages were abruptly cancelled. David tried to call me a dozen times a day. I let them all go to voicemail. I needed him to feel the full weight of reality, without me there to instantly cushion the blow. I needed him to see Chloe for who she really was when the money dried up. On day 14 of the eviction countdown, my doorbell rang at 9 o'clock at night. It was pouring rain. I opened the door to find David standing on my porch, soaked to the bone, looking completely hollowed out. "Mom," he whispered. "Please." I stepped aside and let him in. I led him to the kitchen, handed him a towel, and poured him a glass of Michael's good scotch. He sat at the table, clutching the glass with both hands as if it were a lifeline. "She's losing her mind, Mom," David said, his voice completely flat. "We went to 3 different banks this week to try and get a mortgage to buy the house from you. They laughed us out of the room. My firm's debt-to-income ratio is a disaster because of the $250,000 I owe you. And Chloe. Chloe has no income. What about her savings? I asked, sipping my own scotch. She worked in PR for years before the wedding. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded nothing like my son. That's the funny part. I spent the last 3 days digging through our finances, trying to scrape together enough for a security deposit on an apartment. Do you know what I found, Mum? He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Chloe never had any money. Her PR career was an unpaid internship she stretched on her resume. She comes from a working-class family in Gary, Indiana. She changed her last name to Montgomery because it sounded wealthier. And worse, she has over $80,000 in secret credit card debt under her maiden name. I set my glass down. I knew she was a grifter, but I hadn't realized the depth of the illusion. She's been using my firm's operating accounts to pay the minimums on her secret cards, David confessed, burying his face in his hands. She's been embezzling from my business to maintain her Instagram aesthetic. And when the Amex got shut off, she panicked. She tried to open a new line of credit in my name. David, I breathed, truly horrified. When I confronted her about it this morning, David continued, his voice breaking, she didn't even apologize. She screamed at me. She said I was a failure as a provider. She said if I was half the man my father was, I wouldn't let my mother bully my wife. Where is she now? I asked. She packed a suitcase, took Leo, and drove off, he said, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. She said she was going to a hotel. She took my car because hers is a lease and she's over the mileage. Mum, she said she's filing for divorce. She said she's going to claim I'm financially abusive and take full custody of Leo. She said I'll never see him again. He broke down then, sobbing into his hands. The deep, agonizing sobs of a man who realizes his entire life has been built on a foundation of sand. I walked around the table and wrapped my arms around my son, holding him just as I had when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. But a scraped knee could be fixed with a bandage. This required a surgeon. She thinks she can take my grandson? I whispered into his hair, feeling the cold, familiar fire of the Higgins resolve hardening in my chest. She's going to ruin me, Mom, David cried. She has all these followers. She'll paint me as a monster. David, listen to me, I said, pulling back and forcing him to look me in the eyes. Your father and I didn't build an empire by letting grifters push us around. Chloe is a parasite who just lost her host. She is desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. We are going to fix this. But you have to let me take the reins. David nodded slowly, looking like a drowning man grabbing a rope. What do we do? Tomorrow morning, you are moving back into your childhood bedroom, I instructed, my mind racing with strategy. Then, we go to Marcus Sterling's office. We are going to file for emergency custody, freeze every joint asset, and initiate a forensic accounting audit of your firm. But she has Leo, David said, panic rising again. She'll hide him. Let her try, I said coldly. She has maxed out credit cards and a fake resume. I have a war chest, the best lawyers in Chicago, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The battle lines were drawn. Chloe had wanted to set the rules of engagement. Now, she was going to learn what happens when you declare war on a woman who has already survived the worst life has to offer. The next morning, the Higgins machine rolled into action. I hadn't felt this sharp, this utterly awake, since Michael and I were fighting off a hostile takeover of our third hardware store in 1992. David, pale and trembling, sat beside me in Marcus Sterling's opulent office as a team of paralegals and a forensic accountant named Harrison went to work. Harrison was a quiet, unassuming man who possessed an absolute genius for finding buried money. By noon, he had bypassed the smoke and mirrors of Chloe's finances. The truth was far uglier than a few maxed-out credit cards. She hasn't just been paying minimums, David. Harrison explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses and sliding a thick spreadsheet across the mahogany table. Over the past 14 months, your wife has funneled approximately $120,000 from your firm's operating account into a private shell LLC registered in Delaware. David looked like he had been struck by lightning. What? How? I review the books. She classified them as marketing and PR retainers, Harrison replied grimly. Given her supposed background, it wouldn't immediately raise a red flag. But the vendor she was paying was herself. She was using your business capital to fund her secret debt, buy tens of thousands of fake followers on Instagram, and, most alarmingly, she wired a $40,000 lump sum to a man named Gregory in Indiana. Who is Gregory? I asked, feeling the familiar, cold knot of anger tightening in my stomach. Marcus sighed, looking at a separate file. We had an investigator run a background check on her maiden name. Gregory is her ex-fiancé. Apparently, she pulled a similar stunt on him 5 years ago, racking up debt in his name. The $40,000 was a quiet settlement to keep him from pressing criminal charges. She used your son's money to pay off her past crimes. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe wasn't just a narcissist. She was a calculated serial fraudster. She has my son, David whispered, his voice cracking. She has Leo. We already have, Marcus said calmly. When she took your car, she didn't realize it had an active GPS tracking subscription tied to the dealership app on your phone. She isn't at the Four Seasons, David. Her credit cards declined. She's at a budget motel off the interstate in Skokie. We didn't wait. We didn't send a warning text. Armed with an emergency ex parte custody order signed by a judge who was thoroughly disgusted by the evidence of wire fraud and flight risk, we drove to Skokie. We were accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers and a social worker, a necessity when executing an emergency removal of an infant. The motel was a dreary cinder-block building with peeling paint. Rain lashed against the asphalt as we pulled into the lot. The officers knocked on the door of room 114. Police, open up. A minute later, the door creaked open. Chloe stood there, and for the first time since I had met her, the polished, curated mask was gone. Her hair was a tangled mess, her designer sweatpants were stained, and the harsh, fluorescent light of the motel room illuminated the sheer panic in her eyes. She saw the police. Then she saw David. Finally, her eyes locked onto me, standing in the rain under a black umbrella. "David, what is this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the empty parking lot. "You brought the cops to my hotel. I am his mother. You can't do this to me. Ma'am, step back," the lead officer instructed, handing her the emergency custody order. "We are here to execute a lawful transfer of the child, and we have questions regarding several high-value wire transfers made from Mr. Higgins's business accounts." The mention of the wire transfers was the kill shot. All the fight instantly drained out of Chloe. She realized, in that split second, that her house of cards hadn't just collapsed. It had caught fire. The fabricated social media empire, the victim narrative, the demands for my estate, none of it mattered against federal wire fraud charges. "David," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate, trembling whisper. "David, please. I was going to pay it back. I just needed to maintain our image. Please don't let them arrest me." David walked past her without saying a single word. He emerged a moment later, holding a sleepy, confused Leo securely against his chest. He wrapped his jacket over the baby to shield him from the rain. He looked at Chloe, his face a mask of sorrow and finality. "My lawyer will be in touch, Chloe," David said softly. "Do not contact me." We left her standing in the doorway of a $20 a night motel, clutching a court order, her carefully curated life reduced to ashes. The ensuing legal battle wasn't a battle at all. It was a surrender. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of embezzlement and fraud, Chloe's court-appointed attorney advised her to take a deal. In exchange for David dropping the criminal fraud charges, Chloe signed over full legal and physical custody of Leo. She was granted supervised visitation, once a month, for 2 hours. There would be no spousal support. There would be no trust fund extortion. 6 months later, the Oak Brook house was sold, the profits neatly returning to my LLC. David moved into a beautiful, sunlit townhouse closer to the city, rebuilding his firm with a newfound resilience. He was no longer the frightened, hollow man who had handed me a list of demands. He was a father. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat in the rocking chair in David's living room. The sun was streaming through the windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the floor. In my arms, warm and smelling of baby powder and innocence, was Leo. He reached up, his tiny fingers wrapping tightly around my thumb, and he offered me a crooked, gummy smile that looked exactly like Michael's. I didn't have to wear an unscented scrub. I didn't have to check a timer. I simply held my grandson, knowing that the empire Michael and I built had served its final, greatest purpose. It had protected our family. It has been 2 years since that fateful day. David is thriving, his firm is successful, and Leo is the absolute light of my life. Chloe is a distant memory, allowed only tightly supervised visits. I learned that true love doesn't mean writing a blank check. It means protecting your family fiercely. Sometimes, the hardest boundaries we enforce are the ones that end up saving the people we love the most.